So the world around us and external reality is a really complicated place. And as powerful as our brains are, only a very, very small fraction of the things that we pick up through our senses are actually taken in and processed by our brains. And the way that our brains actually manage to deal with this is through something called heuristics, which are basically mental shortcuts or rules of thumb that basically allow us to operate in this crazy world. And without them, we'll basically be overloaded and it will be difficult to go anywhere. So these were really useful to us in our hunter-gatherer days. So as an example, if we were to eat some sort of plant that would make us unwell, then we would know in future not to eat plants that look similar to that sort of plant. Or if we're in a new environment and we don't know what to do, what we could do is just take a shortcut and look at what everyone else is doing and broadly do the same thing. The only issue with this is that today's world is vastly more complicated than what our prehistoric brains were basically evolved to deal with. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 of the biggest heuristics and the pitfalls that come with them. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to make better quality decisions and also have just an advantage in navigating everyday life in a modern world. So I'm going to start off by giving you a description of a hypothetical character called Steve. And after I give you the description, I want to ask you which is more likely to be his profession. So Steve lives in the US. He's very shy and withdrawn. He's invariably very helpful, but he has very little interest in other people or even of the world of reality. He is a meek and tidy soul, and he has a need for order and structure, and he has a passion for detail. So now that I've told you that, the question I would put to you is Steve more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? So most people will actually answer this question by saying Steve is more likely to be a librarian because after all, if you take the characteristics of Steve as what we've described, it more closely matches that to a librarian than a farmer. As in, if you just take the average librarian, they are going to more closely resemble Steve than the average farmer would. So this is called the representative heuristic. And what we've done is that we've actually ignored the base rate. So let me demonstrate by giving some numbers on this example. So let's just say if you took the entire population of librarians and say roughly 60% would match that description that we've just given of Steve. And if you take the entire population of farmers, only 20% of farmers would match that description. So if we're looking at it purely from a percentage-wise, 3 times more librarians, it seems, than farmers match Steve's description. So surely why is he more likely to be a farmer? Well, the thing is, if you actually look at the statistics for the number of farmers in the US compared to librarians, the figures show that anywhere between there are 6 to 25 times more farmers in the US than there are librarians. So even if you took 20% of the total number of farmers, that number would vastly dwarf even 60% of the entire population of librarians. So basically what I'm saying is the raw number of farmers that match that description is going to vastly be bigger than the number of librarians. So therefore, Steve is more likely to be a farmer. So if we actually take a moment and see what's going on, 2 things have actually happened. One is that we took a complicated question and then substituted it for a much simpler one. So the question was, what profession was Steve more likely to be? But we've actually taken that and substituted for, which is that which group best matches Steve, which is a lot easier to answer. And the second thing that our brains have actually done is we've taken that information that's directly in front of us and just gone with it and ignored the space of what we don't know, the negative information, so to speak. So this is called base rate neglect. So one way to overcome this, if we're faced with a similar situation, is just to take a pause and try and obtain the statistics to get the full picture, not just a very limited view. So the availability heuristic describes how that our brains are not really designed to analyze and respond to abstract probabilities, but we actually respond much more strongly to vivid images that elicit an emotional response. A very famous experiment, researchers Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky were actually able to demonstrate this. So what they did was they gave students a list of a number of hypothetical scenarios, and then they asked these students to rate these scenarios in order of probability of how likely they were going to happen in the upcoming year. And in this list, there were 2 scenarios. The first scenario describes how there was going to be a massive flood somewhere in the US where 1,000 people are going to drown from it. And then we have scenario 2, which describes that there was going to be a massive earthquake that would hit California sometime in the next year, which would cause a massive flood in which 1,000 people were going to drown from it. So the first one is kind of abstract. We're saying there's going to be a big flood somewhere in the US. It could be absolutely anywhere. It could be Las Vegas. It could be New York, whatever. Whereas the second one is much more specific. We're talking about an earthquake, which California is known for, which would cause an earthquake. So in our brain, it forms kind of a coherent causal story and it's easy to visualize because the details here are much richer. And of course, most participants actually rated the second scenario more likely, even though mathematically and from a logical point of view, it's literally impossible because the first scenario is wider ranging. It actually includes the second scenario in it and other scenarios too. So this is actually something that's very commonly exploited in the mainstream media, in news and things like this, especially when it comes to politics, because they just know how strongly the human brain can react to specific instances. So whatever the political narrative is, it's very easy to cherry pick examples that match that. So it's really important to recognize that when this is happening, that we need to take a step back and understand that just because something is abstract, it doesn't make it less likely, and vice versa. Just because something is very visceral and we can easily visualize it, it doesn't automatically make it more likely. So anchoring is actually quite a fun one. So the same researchers, Kahneman and Tversky, carried out another experiment where they got participants to spin a wheel of fortune. And on this wheel of fortune were just various numbers, some larger, some smaller. And after the participants spun the wheel of fortune, they asked the participants to take a look at the number which they knew full well beforehand that it was completely random. And then they asked these participants to guess the number of African nations in the UN. And interestingly, all of the participants that spun higher numbers would guess a correspondingly high number for African countries in the United Nations, which of course has zero relation whatsoever to the Wheel of Fortune number. So our brains just do not like any sort of certainty at all, and it will latch onto anything just to cut down on that uncertainty, even if it's completely wrong. Probably evolved in such a way that making a quick and dirty decision would give survival advantages compared to someone who would take a longer time and really mull over and analyze the situation. But the issue is that's not true in today's world, and this one is used everywhere, most particularly in negotiation. In the brilliant book, expert negotiator Chris Voss actually acknowledges just how powerful anchors can be in the negotiation space. So he talks about how if you're up against a very experienced counterpart, very often what they'll do is set an extreme anchor, which will basically dictate the tone and the rhythm of the negotiation upcoming. And he gives a few ways to basically overcome this. One thing is basically to refuse to engage with this high anchor, just to say, okay, let's just pause this for a moment and let's talk about some non-monetary terms. Let's talk about what other terms would actually move this deal, and we can come back to it. So personally, once I realized just how powerful anchors can be, it's just made me pause a little bit every time I have to come up with some sort of estimate or guess or a figure or absolutely anything. So I'll pause and ask myself, is there actually a logical reason that I came up with this number, or have I actually been anchored against something? Social proof is a very powerful one and fairly well known. Basically, when we don't really know what to do, we tend to look to others and copy the same thing. So there's this very famous experiment where there's a lift full of actors and then one's unsuspecting participant. And what happens is all of the actors will at some point turn and face the wrong way, so basically away from the door. And then what you see is the participant kind of look confused, but then invariably they will turn and face the wrong way as well, even though it doesn't make any sense to them. And then there's another very similar experiment, but instead of participants going in a lift, they're shown a series of 3 lines, and then they have to just say which one they think is the shortest. And all of the other actors would say the longest one is actually the shortest. And the crazy thing is, in this example, it's very obvious which one is the shorter line, but 75% of participants will actually change their answer and go with the general consensus. So in his brilliant book, Influence, Professor Sildani mentions there are 3 factors that really can amplify just how strong social proof can be. So number 1 is uncertainty. When we don't know what to do, or if we're in an unfamiliar environment, we tend to look to others. So number 2 is if there are many others. So for example, if 50 people are going against what we're saying, we're far, far more likely to doubt ourselves than if only 5 people were doing something different to what we were doing. And number 3 is similarity. We're far, far more likely to be influenced by others who we deem similar to us or have some areas of commonality. And we see this being used in everyday life all of the time. So for example, online reviews can literally make or break a business. I know a lot of people who would never go out to a restaurant to eat without checking online reviews first. Another really common one are hotels and accommodation booking websites. So a lot of the time what happens is when you're browsing, you'll have these pop-ups popping up saying hours, X number of people have viewed this property, or when you click into it, in the last 6 hours, Y number of people have actually booked it. So that's a lot of social proof. It creates a lot of urgency, and you say to yourself, well, surely if all of these people are viewing and booking this hotel, surely it must be a good one. So it's safe for me to book it. So this is something I've tried to keep in mind all of the time. So if I'm about to do something, I ask myself, is there actually a good logical reason for doing it, or am I just doing it because everyone else is. Actually, in this day and age, counter to our hunter-gatherer days, it can actually very often pay to do the opposite thing to the crowd. So the famous example would be, for example, investing in stocks. It does not pay generally just to follow the crowd. A famous quote from Warren Buffett: be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. So yeah, be very, very conscious of just how powerful social proof can be. The final one, belief perseverance, is my favorite heuristic to overcome, because once you're able to transcend and see through this, it affects literally everything else. And this describes basically our brain's tendency to hold on to ideas and thoughts like they are possessions, meaning that it's very, very painful to let them go. As a heuristic, it goes back to reducing doubt and uncertainty in our minds. Because once we learn a new idea in our prehistoric world, we don't want to expend time and energy challenging our own thoughts, mulling over things. We want to be quick and efficient. And in the past, the environment probably didn't change very much from a day-to-day basis. And of course, it was much, much simpler than today's world. So this explains the effect of an experience I'm sure all of us have actually had. So say we're having a conversation with someone and they're wrong, and then you try to correct them with logic. But what you find that no matter how well constructed your argument is, no matter how logical it is, the more you argue, the more entrenched in their original view the other person seems to be. And this is summarized from the quote by Arthur Schopenhauer: a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Overcoming belief perseverance is the hardest heuristic to overcome of them all, because it's so core to our nature. Basically this instinct of marriage to our ideas. And it's actually very, very rare to find people willing to go against this and correct their own ideas. But in terms of rising above others, in terms of epistemology, intellectually, we must have this willingness to challenge our own ideas and to drop them in the face of new evidence. Go back through history, it's precisely because of this change in mindset where we had years and years, tens of thousands of years of just purely static societies where there was no improvement, to having the Enlightenment and huge amounts of scientific discovery leading to basically our lifestyles today. It's precisely because of this change in mindset that allowed us to challenge authority figures and dogmas and old beliefs that were just plain wrong. So those were the 5 biggest heuristics and how to overcome them. Most of them basically stem from just reducing our cognitive load. So if you are interested in more content like this, be sure to sign up to my free newsletter where I go over topics like this in a lot more detail. And if you want to learn more about connecting ideas across different domains, be sure to check out this video on how I remember everything I read. Thanks so much for watching, and if that was useful, do consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.